Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Hacked and Unfiltered. I am your host, Omar Rao, with an exciting topic today about cyber resilience in the boardroom. I'm going to give you some insight today. I'm going to talk about how boardrooms, how executives, and how leaders should think during a live cyber event, where decision making often breaks, and why resilience is built long before the crisis begin. If you listened to the last episode, then you know we went deep into one of the fastest growing risks in cybersecurity today. In the last episode, we talked about deepfake, we talked about deceptions, we talked about human attack surface. And we tried to break down how attackers are no longer just trying to break the system, they're trying to break the trust. We talked about clone voices. We talked about executive impersonation, some of those fake urgencies, those synthetic deceptions out there. And the very real problem of the business is making bad decision under pressure. Because something sounded believable enough, they made that decision. And that decision turned out to be bad. And if you have not listened to this particular previous podcast, I would like you to go back and listen to it and then share it with somebody who still thinks cyber risk starts and ends with malware and phishing links. We have moved beyond that. And that is where this episode is going to make more sense for you, because it shows that modern attacks nowadays are becoming more human, more personal, and even more psychological. So today's topic set this up perfectly, okay? Because once you understand that cyber attack now target trust, pressure, and decision making, then the next question becomes obvious. What happens when the pressure reaches the boardroom? So sit back, relax, and as I always say, grab your coffee, because I love coffee. If you're traveling, be safe. If you're listening to this and you want to listen to this later, save it, bookmark it, and share it with the people who actually wants to hear this. Because this episode is meant for CISOs. This episode is meant for leaders like CEOs, COOs, or even any founders, and anybody who in the executive decision making or who's in the boardroom. I'm going to talk about a lot of good things today. Some of the things are going to be repetitive. Some of the things you already know, you might going to say, I know about this. But some things will open up your eyes. How leaders should think under pressure. That's the topic. That's what I'm going to focus on. What strong decision making actually looks like during a live cyber incident. Because when the incident happened, that does not knock on the door and say, hey, I'm coming. It just comes, okay? What exactly executives are doing wrong? So am I going to say things is not going to resonate good with executives today? But just remember, it is a hard truth. If we accept what our responsibility is, we can make better, sensible decisions. Why resilience is not just stopping the attacks today. It is about keeping the business standing when the attack is underway. I say all the time, the cyber incident is a leadership test. It is not a technical test. Let's start with the biggest misunderstanding. Because a lot of people think that cyber incidents are mostly technical events, okay? They imagine the security team is handling all the alerts. They think the IT team is restoring the systems. Maybe legal gets involved. Maybe it's a PR issue. PR shows up and if things get really ugly. But that is too narrow. A serious cyber incident is not just a technical event. It is a business event. It is a decision-making event. It is a leadership test event. Because once the incident becomes real, the leadership has to answer hard questions very quickly. They have to question, they will get questions like, what systems matter most right now? What do we shut down first? What do we keep running? Who do I need to notify? These are some of the questions which leadership has to think. And I can talk about those questions like, what do we tell our customers? What do we tell our regulators? What do we tell our employees? What does our real blast radius look like? And it just doesn't stop there. The questions might be tricky, might be tough. Then how much do we know versus how much we are assuming? What is the operational priorities for the next hour or next day or even next week? Those are not tool questions. Those are leadership questions. And if the leadership is not prepared, even a technical strong organization can still perform poorly during the crisis. And I can tell you this one more thing. A lot of leaders sometimes make these incidents extremely worse. I'm trying to be honest here. Executives do not usually make cyber incident worse because they're clueless or careless. They make them worse because they're under pressure and they're often operating outside their comfort zone. I have high respect for all leaders, but under pressure, people make mistakes. That pressure creates predictable mistakes. And here are some of the big ones, okay? First, demanding certainty too early. During a live incident, leadership often wants exact answer immediately, okay? What happened? How bad it is? Who did it? What data is gone? Even when we will recover. I work in data resiliency market where recovery matters. They want to know how quickly they will be able to recover. And those are fair questions. Believe me. But early in an incident, the answers are often incomplete. If a leader push for certainty too fast, the team may guess too early, communicate too early, anchor on wrong story. We need to focus on optics. Some leadership becomes too focused on public image because they understand the operational reality. And that is dangerous. Believe me, that is very dangerous. Because if an internal picture is weak, the external messaging will collapse quickly. And sometimes these same leaders try to bypass to move faster. Hey, get this thing done later, focus on this first. And this one happens more than the people realize. Bypassing to go quicker. An executive wants immediate action. They want to override communication flow. They sometimes want to demand the shortcuts. They create side channels that usually create more confusion, not less. And put it on the top of it, Treating cyber like contained IT problem is not the right answer. A real incident spills into operations. The real incident spills into legal, finance, even HR, and most importantly, customer trust. Imagine vendor management. It can affect that. It can affect a leadership communication. And if the response stays siloed, the business loses clarity very, very fast. So, what cyber resiliency actually means? A lot of people use this term cyber resiliency very loosely. Let's define that in a way that matters, okay? Cyber resiliency is not just the ability to prevent an attack, it is the ability to keep functioning, adapting under pressure, recovering your data set intelligently when prevention is no longer enough. Period. That means resiliency includes visibility, it includes recovery planning, it includes decision making, prioritization, better communication, and I can talk about a list long enough. The resiliency matters. And it includes a lot more, like redundancy, a discipline in leadership, clarity in role, and even operational continuity. Here's a simple way to explain this, okay? Cybersecurity tries to reduce the chance of getting hit. Cyber resiliency accepts that something may still go wrong and asks, can we keep operation with control, logic, and discipline anyways? That is the difference. A practical scenario, if I have to give you an example, let's take it, let's imagine a mid-size enterprise, okay? I'm not going to name any enterprises, but I'm not talking about enterprise organization. I'm talking about a mid-size organization. It wakes up to a sign of a major incident, something happening right now. And some of those employees cannot access the system. Unusual activity is found on different log files, and file share goes offline. Now, your SOC team is investigating this suspicious admin behavior. While these analyses are happening, the executive team is now pulled in. At that point, the company is not fully facing a technical issue. It is facing a business pressure wave. The CEO wants to know if this is a ransomware. The CFO wants to know what financial exposure has happened. Legal team wants to know if notification thresholds are triggered. Operation team wants to know if the key services stays up. Communication wants to know what can be said externally. And even Boardroom and the board guys are asking for an update. Not to think about security team is still trying to establishing the facts. This is where resiliency get tested all the time. Not because the tool has failed, but because the organization now need disciplined leadership under uncertainty. And that is a real boardroom problem today. As an ethical hacker, guys, here's something I think leaders needs to hear more often. Attackers do not just look for technical weaknesses. They benefit from organization confusion. They benefit when teams do not know who is in charge. These attackers get benefit when the executives create side requests. They also get benefits out of this when communication becomes fragmented. Priorities shift every 10 minutes. People react emotionally. That's when they benefit. That confusion increases the recovery times. It increases mistakes. It increases blast radius. And sometimes it gives the attacker more room than the original compromise itself. If I'm saying something wrong today, guys, I do apologize. But that is a hard truth. So from my perspective, one of the strongest security control is a real incident in not only one direction, but in a disciplined leadership action. Clear lanes, clear authority, clear communication, even calm pressure handling is a must. And that is the biggest difference during cyber event. Strong leadership matters in a crisis situation. Everybody's looking at them. So what does a good leadership actually looks like in major cyber event? First, leaders must establish rhythm. That means structure updates, not random interruptions, not 10 people texting different teams, real cadence. Real cadence. Leaders separate facts from assumption, please. This is critical because team needs to know what is confirmed, what is suspected, and what is still unknown. Leaders prioritize critical functions, especially related to business. Not everything gets solved once. The strong leaders always ask, what must stay alive? What can be paused? What matters most in the next 6 hours? What creates the biggest risk right now? Leaders support process instead of bypassing it. Speed matters, but chaos is not speed. Leaders must communicate with discipline. That also include internal staff, even customers, even legal stakeholders, partner, regulators, and board, and everybody. Communicate with discipline. Leaders must avoid overpromising. This is a huge one. Do not announce confidence that you do not actually have. It will come back later. Why board needs a different cyber conversation today? A lot of board members still think and still talk about cyber risk in a really wrong language. They focus on completely different things. They talk about maturity scores. They talk about tool counts. They talk about compliancy checkboxes they got from somebody. They like to see all these red, yellow, green dashboards and all these policy completion. That is not enough. The board conversation needs to include operational resilience. It needs to include critical dependencies, recovery assumptions, decision being right, communication readiness. The board conversation needs a lot more. If it's focused on vendor, then vendor consideration related to risk. If it's related to identity, how much identity exposure that is. Data, how much data exposure there is. Leadership readiness under pressure. That should be the board conversation must include. But because the real question is not that, do we have the cyber tools? The real question is, when something serious happens, do we know how this business holds together? This is much better boardroom question. Let's talk about why leaders are most exposed at. Let me put this plainly in front of you. Leaders are most exposed when they assume more readiness than actually what it exists. They have never rehearsed a real incident. They confuse reporting with resilience. And even to the extent they allow exceptions in their culture, and they override the process all the time. They do not understand the business dependencies, and they do not know who can make the decision during crisis. I use a term called cutted head chickens. They're running in the organization like a cutted head chickens sometimes, not knowing the processes. And that is bad. That exposes them. Sometimes they do not even know what to do in that pressure to test the communication plans, how to communicate with the right team. And they heavily rely on one or two key people in the organization. So, for those who like simple examples, let me talk about a simple example. A company, think of our company, may think of this cyber response plan. A company must have a cyber response plan. But when a real incident happens, everyone still asks, who owns the call? Who approves the shutdown? Who talks to the customer? Who handles the regulators? Who decide what goes to the board? If those questions are still being figured out live, then the plan was not real enough. So let me say this in more lighter way. Some companies think they are cyber resilient because they have a really nice slide deck, a nice looking policy binder, one tabletop from 2 years ago where everyone nodded seriously for 40 minutes and then went back to lunch. That is not resilience. That is cybersecurity theater. Resilience, the real resilience, shows up when the environment is noisy, the facts are incomplete, the executives are under pressure, and the organization still needs to move with discipline. And that is a standard. So what organization should do now? We talked about a lot of monologue here. What organization should do? If you're listening to this and asking what your organization should do next, here's what where I would start first. First, define decision rights clearly. Again, define your decision rights clearly. Decide and know who decides certain things. System shutdowns, external messaging, customer notification, even legal escalation, the vendor coordinations. even the board updates. Second, you need to identify critical business functions before the incident. In this series of episodes, we've been talking about OT, we're talking about environments and AI and others. Please identify your critical business function before the incident happens. Do not wait until the attack happens to decide what is the most important thing. Third, rehearse executive level scenarios, not just the technical ones. Run scenarios around cloud compromise, run scenarios like identity abuse, data exposure, ransomware with business continuity pressure. Even from previous episode, we talked about executive impersonation. Run that. Think about OT exposure. Remember that operational disruption? You can run those scenarios. In fourth, I would say improving your communication discipline. You need to create structure for what gets reported, how often, by whom, in what format, and with what distinction between facts and assumption. Fifth, I would say challenge recovery assumptions. Ask, what actually needs to be restored first? What dependency exists today? What vendor relationship matters the most? What should you slow down first? What if the key people are unavailable? What to do in that scenario? You need to also make cyber resilience leadership topic, not just a security topic. That shift matters a lot. Now, you might wonder how I'm going to take this information from Omar and bring that to the people who are non-technical. So here's a simple way to explain this. A cyber incident is not only a technical disruption, it is a business pressure test. It tests how well leaders think, communicate, prioritize, and act when the facts are incomplete and the stakes are extremely high. That is why cyber resiliency matters. It is not just about preventing the hit. It is about staying functional when that hit lands. That is a clean, clear explanation. So this is a good place in this episode now that you can say, if you're a founder, this matters to you. If you're a board member, that matters to you. If you're a security leader, trying to get your executives to think differently, this matters to you. Let's say if you're an operator who has ever watched a room filled with noises during a crisis, this matters to you. Because cyber resilience is not just about surviving the first alert. It's about how organization behaves when the pressure starts spreading. And that is where leaders either stabilize the moment or amplify the chaos. So, we talked about a lot of things today. If there's one message I want to give you today from this, it is a cyber incident is not just the test of tools. It is a test of our leadership. It is a test how clearly people think, how calmly they communicate, how well they are separated fact from fear. Leaders can identify and prioritize under pressure. whether the business can keep functioning with discipline, or even when the environment gets noisy. And that is what cyber resiliency really means. So, what should you do after this episode? Forget about this? No. I want you to pick one action, just like I always say in previous episodes. You need to pick one. You need to define your decision rights in the event of a cyber incident. Pick one. You can run an executive tabletop internally. You need to do this by review, by having communication structure during crisis check. How my communication will be, who I'm going to be reaching out to, what that IR plan is going to be. Write it down. Make it available. Identify your top 3 business critical functions. Simply. Even if I'll be in that shoes, I would challenge even 1 recovery assumptions. Ask your board, cyber resiliency, what it means to them. Or it's just a simple cyber reporting dashboards with red, yellow, greens. If this episode gave you a new perspective, please send it to somebody. Share it with the founder, share it with the CISO, with COO, a board member possibly, finance leader, somebody who thinks resiliency is just another word for backup. Because it is much bigger than that. So we talked about a lot of things in episode 8. We are going to move into another critical part of modern defense. We're going to talk about cyber fatigue, alerting overload. We're going to talk about why security team break down even when they have really good tools in their pocketbook. We'll break down how analysts burns out. I will talk about signals to noise problem. We're going to talk about bad workflow designs. We're going to talk about what organizations should do if they want stronger defenders and not just more dashboards. Before that episode, ask your team this question. If a serious cyber incident happens tonight, would leadership create clarity or would they create noise? And if this answer is unclear, then that is where your next conversation needs to begin. I want to thank you for attending this session. I hope you liked this session. Cyber resiliency in a boardroom is a different topic meant for few, but those few can make a difference. Until next episode, I want to thank you for joining Hacked and Unfiltered, and follow us on Spotify, Substack, and Apple Podcast. Like, share, follow on LinkedIn or Substack, and share with the people where it matters. Until next episode, thank you very much.